I don't
A
understand
rancher
why
went
you're
to buy a
blaming me for
horse,
this.
but found a broken
Because it
woman
is your
chained in the
fault.
dark instead.
Everything is
For over
always
20
your
years,
fault.
he had tended to his ranch in the quiet stretches of Texas, where the horizon seemed endless, and the wind carried the scent of grass and horses. His mornings were always the same. He would wake up before sunrise, grab his worn-out boots, and step out into the cool, fresh air, listening to the soft lowing of cattle and the gentle nickering of horses. There was a rhythm to ranch life, a comforting consistency, and John found peace in that rhythm. It wasn't an easy life, certainly not glamorous, but it was honest, and it belonged to him. That morning began like any other. The sky was painted in pale oranges and pinks, the sun stretching its first rays across the wide open land. John sipped his black coffee, feeling the warmth spread through his hands, and thought about the work ahead. He had a busy day planned, but first, there was a small errand he had been meaning to take care of for a while, buying a new horse. One of his older horses, a faithful gelding named Tucker, had started showing signs of fatigue. He was still strong, but John wanted a younger horse to share the workload, to run alongside Tucker and keep the ranch moving smoothly. John loaded up his old pickup truck with hay, water, and a few supplies, and drove down the winding dirt road toward a nearby farm that had been recommended by a friend. It wasn't far, maybe a half-hour drive, but the road twisted through open fields, over gentle hills, and alongside patches of trees where deer sometimes appeared at dawn. The landscape was serene, and John let his mind wander, thinking about his life on the ranch, the horses he had raised, and the satisfaction of seeing a day's hard work come to life in the fields. As he approached the farm, John noticed something unusual. From the road, the property looked fairly normal at first glance. There was a modest house, a few outbuildings, and a large fenced area for animals. But then his eyes caught sight of a barn in the distance, tucked behind some trees. It was darker than the other structures, older, and seemed neglected. The paint was peeling, the wood was warped, and the door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Something about it didn't feel right, though John couldn't put his finger on what. He shrugged, thinking perhaps it was just an old barn, a relic from years past that the current owner hadn't bothered to fix. John parked his truck near the main house and walked toward the barn, his boots crunching on the gravel. The farm was quiet, almost too quiet, which made him feel slightly uneasy. Usually, he would hear the sounds of chickens clucking or dogs barking in the morning, but today there was nothing but the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. He thought about the horse he was there to buy and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. Still, as he got closer to the barn, he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. From inside the barn came a faint, irregular sound, like someone struggling to breathe or moving in discomfort. It was very soft, almost too quiet to hear, but it was there, unmistakable. John froze for a moment, unsure if his imagination was playing tricks on him. Then he heard it again, a slight movement and a whispered, helpless noise. Something inside him told him he needed to check it out. He had spent enough years on the ranch to know the difference between ordinary animal sounds and a human in trouble. Taking a deep breath, John pushed the barn door open slowly. It creaked loudly, echoing through the dim interior. Dust floated in the air, catching the light from the doorway, and he squinted, trying to see clearly. The barn smelled old and damp, with a hint of mold and something that he couldn't quite identify. The floor was covered in hay, and the shadows seemed unusually heavy, as if the darkness itself was thicker in this corner. Then he saw her. She was sitting on the floor in a corner, hunched over, her head bowed, and her arms positioned awkwardly, as if she had been forced to stay there for a long time. At first, John thought she might be ill or asleep, but then he noticed her eyes. They were wide open, filled with fear, confusion, and something else he couldn't name. There was a look in her eyes that told John this wasn't just exhaustion. She had endured something terrible, and it had left her broken in ways he could barely imagine. John took a cautious step forward. He didn't want to startle her, and he knew that sudden movements could frighten someone who had been in such a state for a long time. "Hey," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just here to help." His words seemed almost fragile in the vast, quiet barn, but slowly, he saw her blink and lift her head slightly, as if she was trying to understand whether she could trust him. She was very thin, much thinner than John would have expected, with her hair tangled and her clothes worn. Her hands were positioned awkwardly, and she flinched when he took another step closer. John realized that her fear wasn't just of strangers. It was a fear that came from living in a world where she had no control, where safety was a distant memory. His heart ached at the sight, but he kept his voice gentle. "I'm going to get you some help," John said. He turned toward his truck, grabbed a bottle of water and a soft blanket he always kept in the back, and returned to her side. He knelt at a safe distance and offered the water first, hoping she would drink. Slowly, hesitantly, she took a few sips. Her hands shook as she held the bottle, but there was a spark of recognition in her eyes, the realization that someone was showing her care without expecting anything in return. John didn't know how long she had been in this condition, but he knew it had to be a long time. He could see the marks of neglect in her posture, in the hollow look of her face, and in the way she reacted to the simplest movements. Yet, in that moment, she allowed him to place the blanket around her shoulders. It was a small gesture, but John knew it was significant. It meant trust, or at least the beginning of it. Outside, the morning sun continued to rise, but inside the barn, the air felt heavier with the weight of what had been uncovered. John realized that his simple trip to buy a horse had turned into something far more serious. This was no ordinary morning, and this was no ordinary discovery. The woman before him had lived a life of unimaginable hardship, and John was now a part of the story that could bring her out of that darkness. He stayed with her, talking softly, reassuring her that she was safe now, until he could call the authorities. Every sound, every shadow in the barn seemed magnified, but John focused on her, on keeping her calm, on making her understand that there was someone willing to protect her. In that moment, the rancher, who had spent his life caring for animals, realized that sometimes humans needed care just as desperately. By the time John finally stepped outside to make the call, the sun was higher in the sky. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, a reminder that life continued even in the face of tragedy. He spoke quietly into his phone, giving details to the local authorities, and made sure she knew he was there and that help was on the way. She nodded slightly, a tiny sign of relief that told John he had done the right thing. As he waited, John thought about his ranch, about the horses he was supposed to buy, and about how quickly life could change. One moment he had been planning an ordinary day, and the next he was part of a story far larger than himself, a story of fear, neglect, and the first fragile steps toward hope. When the authorities arrived, John stepped back, letting them take over, but he stayed close, offering quiet words of encouragement to the woman as they led her to safety. The barn that had seemed so ordinary before now held a memory that would never leave him. John realized that heroism was not always loud or grand. Sometimes it was quiet, patient, and simple, a kind word, a gentle touch, a decision to act when it mattered most. And as John drove home later, his truck loaded now with a new horse he had purchased, he thought about the woman he had found that morning. He didn't know her story, but he knew that her life had changed forever that day, and somehow, so had his. The ranch, the routine, the animals, they were still there, but so was the knowledge that sometimes, being human meant stepping into darkness and helping someone find the light. The barn was quiet again after John had stepped outside to call the authorities, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy and tense. The woman remained in the corner, wrapped loosely in the blanket John had placed around her shoulders. Her eyes darted nervously toward the door, as though expecting someone or something to come back. She hadn't said a word since John had arrived, only responding with small movements, slight nods, or a faint blink. Her silence told John everything he needed to know. Trust would not come easily, and every step forward would have to be slow and careful. John moved closer, crouching down at a safe distance so she could see him clearly. He spoke gently, keeping his voice steady. "It's okay. You're safe now. I'm not going anywhere. No one is going to hurt you here." He paused, watching her reaction. Her shoulders trembled slightly, but she didn't shrink back completely. That small sign, almost imperceptible, gave John hope. He knew that after so much fear and neglect, even a tiny gesture of calmness was significant. The first thing John wanted to do was get her some nourishment. He walked back to his truck and returned with a small lunch he had packed earlier, along with a bottle of water. "You must be hungry," he said softly. He set the food down a few feet away, careful not to crowd her. For a long moment she just stared at it, unsure what to do. Hunger and fear were tangled together, making it hard for her to take the simplest actions. But slowly she reached for a piece of bread, her hands shaking. John watched quietly, refusing to force her, letting her make her own choice. As she ate, John took the time to observe her surroundings. The barn had been empty for a long time, at least in the corner where she had been. Dust covered the floor, and broken tools and hay bales were scattered haphazardly. Light filtered through cracks in the walls, falling on the floor in narrow, dusty beams. It was not a place meant for a person to live, let alone for anyone to survive in for months or years. John's heart ached as he realized how long this woman might have been here, surviving in silence, cut off from the world. Once she had eaten a little and sipped some water, John decided to ask gently about her name. "I'm John," he said. "Can you tell me your name?" She flinched at the question, but after a moment whispered a name soft and fragile, almost as if it had been forgotten. John nodded encouragingly. "Thank you for telling me. I promise I won't let anything bad happen to you." She looked at him, uncertain, her eyes wary, but she didn't look away. That small connection, a simple exchange of names, felt monumental. Minutes passed slowly. The wind rustled through the barn and the sunlight moved across the dusty floor, but John didn't rush. He knew he had to let her set the pace. Trust wasn't something that could be demanded or rushed. It had to grow, like a plant nurtured carefully over time. Every word he spoke was calm, reassuring, and consistent. Every movement was deliberate, showing her that she had no reason to be afraid, at least not of him. Suddenly, a faint sound outside the barn caught John's attention. It was the crunch of footsteps on gravel. He turned his head slightly and saw the local sheriff and 2 deputies approaching the barn. Relief washed over him. The authorities had arrived, just as he had hoped. He motioned for them to wait a moment, not wanting to alarm the woman. "Ma'am," John said gently, turning back to her, "some people are coming to help us. You're going to be okay." Her eyes widened slightly at the sound of the voices outside, but she didn't resist when John took a cautious step closer and guided her a little more toward the light. She still flinched, still recoiled slightly, but she didn't run or hide completely. She was starting to understand that these people were different from those she had known before. When the sheriff and deputies entered, John stayed nearby, speaking softly to both the woman and the officers. He explained what he had found, describing the barn, her condition, and her behavior. "She's scared," John said, "but she's alive, and she needs help. Please be gentle with her." The officers nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. They approached slowly, allowing her to adjust to their presence, and one of them spoke quietly, introducing himself and letting her know they were there to take care of her, not to punish her. The woman's eyes filled with tears, though she tried to blink them away. She was overwhelmed, confused, and exhausted. Years of fear, neglect, and isolation had left her unsure of how to respond to kindness, but John remained patient. He whispered words of reassurance, telling her she could stay calm, that she was safe, and that nothing bad would happen now. He kept his hand lightly on the blanket around her shoulders, not touching her directly but offering a presence she could rely on. The officers gently helped her to her feet. She moved cautiously, holding onto the blanket like a lifeline. John stayed close, encouraging her, walking alongside her as they exited the barn. The morning sun felt warm on her face, and she squinted against the light, adjusting to the sudden exposure after so long in the darkness. It was more than just physical light. It was a symbolic step toward a new life, a life where she could breathe without fear, eat without worry, and trust without hesitation. Outside, a patrol car waited. The officers spoke softly, explaining what would happen next, that she would be taken to a safe place where she could rest, eat, and receive medical attention. They emphasized that no one would hurt her and that she was in control of her next steps. Slowly she nodded, allowing them to guide her into the vehicle. John stood back, watching, his heart heavy but hopeful. He realized that this was only the beginning. She had survived the past, but now she had to survive the present, rebuild trust, and learn to feel safe again. After she was safely in the patrol car, John stayed behind in the barn for a moment, letting the gravity of what had happened sink in. He thought about the randomness of life, how a simple trip to buy a horse had led him to witness both incredible pain and incredible resilience. He thought about the courage it must have taken for her to endure what she had endured, and the courage it would take to start over. John felt a deep sense of responsibility, knowing that his actions had played a small but vital role in helping her take the first steps toward freedom. As the patrol car drove away, John walked back toward his truck, feeling the weight of the morning. He thought about Tucker, his old horse, grazing peacefully back at the ranch, and about the new horse waiting for him. But more than anything, he thought about the woman, her fear, her strength, and the fragile trust she had begun to place in a stranger. He realized that life was full of unexpected turns, and sometimes the moments that tested us the most were also the moments that defined us. Driving back down the winding road to his ranch, John felt a mixture of exhaustion and quiet satisfaction. He had set out that morning for a simple errand, something routine and ordinary. Instead, he had been part of a story of rescue, hope, and the first fragile steps toward healing. The experience left him reflective, reminding him that life could change in an instant, and that every act of kindness, no matter how small, could have a profound impact. When he reached his ranch, John parked his truck and watched the sun climb higher in the sky. The horses were grazing, the fields stretched endlessly, and the world felt both familiar and different. He thought about the woman he had found, the darkness she had endured, and the journey ahead of her. And in that quiet moment, John understood something deeply. Courage isn't always loud or heroic. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and simple, showing up when someone needs help, offering comfort and standing as a steady presence in a world that can be frightening. That night, as John fed his horses and settled into the routine of ranch life, he couldn't stop thinking about the woman. He knew she would face challenges ahead, but he also knew that the first step, the hardest step, had been taken. And he felt a sense of humility and gratitude, knowing that he had witnessed a moment of human resilience and had been given the chance to make a difference. The barn, the dark corner, the frightened woman, they had become part of his story, a story of hope, courage, and the quiet power of compassion. After the patrol car drove away with the woman safely inside, John remained at the barn, feeling the weight of what had just happened. The sun was higher in the sky now, casting long, warm beams across the dusty floor. Though the immediate danger had passed, John could not shake a sense of unease. Something about the property still felt wrong. The main house, which had appeared ordinary from the road, now seemed strangely silent, almost too quiet for a place where people lived. He decided he needed to talk to the farm owner. If anyone had been responsible for the woman's condition, it was important to understand what had happened, and John felt a responsibility to ensure that the situation was fully addressed. Walking toward the house, John noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. He called out in a calm, steady voice, "Hello, is anyone home?" There was no immediate response, just the faint sound of a door creaking in the wind. He stepped inside carefully, taking in the worn furniture, the dusty floor, and the faint smell of old wood mixed with lingering animal odors. The house felt abandoned, yet John could see signs that someone had been living there: a chair pulled out from the table, an unwashed mug on the counter, and papers scattered across the desk. Finally, a man appeared from the shadows of the living room. He was middle-aged, with a rough, sun-beaten face and clothes that looked worn and stained from work. His expression was guarded, almost defensive. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice wary. John straightened, maintaining a calm, steady tone. "I just need to talk to you about what I found in your barn," John said. "There's a woman there she needs help. She was in a very dangerous situation." The man's eyes flickered, but his face remained carefully neutral. "I don't know what you mean," he said. His tone was firm but not openly aggressive, and John sensed that any confrontation would need to be measured and careful. He didn't want to put the woman in further danger or escalate the situation unnecessarily. "I need you to understand," John continued, keeping his voice calm and even. "I found her chained in the barn. She is very scared and she needs immediate care. I've called the authorities. They're on their way." For a moment the man said nothing. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding John's eyes. Then he finally spoke, attempting to downplay the situation. She's fine. She was just resting. Nothing serious." John noticed the tension in his voice, the small tremor that betrayed the lie. "I'm sorry," John said softly but firmly. "I can't believe that. I saw her. She's weak, frightened, and she needs medical attention. You can't ignore this." The man's defensiveness hardened. "Look, this is my property. You shouldn't be poking around in my barn. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this." John realized that he needed to remain calm and avoid any argument that might escalate. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said gently, "but a human life is more important than property lines or rules. She deserves help, and now it's too late to pretend everything is normal. The authorities are coming. You need to cooperate." The tension in the room was palpable. John could feel the man's unease, the attempt to hide the truth under layers of excuses. But he also saw that the man was losing control. John remained steady, not raising his voice, not making threats, simply stating facts and insisting on action. It was a delicate balance. He had to protect the woman and ensure the man did not escalate to aggression. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of sirens in the distance brought a wave of relief to John. He turned slightly to see the lights of 2 police vehicles approaching, signaling that the authorities were near. He knew the presence of trained officers would help de-escalate the situation. The man in the house stiffened, clearly realizing that his attempts to downplay or hide the truth would no longer work. When the officers arrived, John stepped back, allowing them to take the lead. He gave them a concise explanation of the situation, describing the barn, the condition of the woman, and the man's responses. The officers approached carefully, speaking to the man in calm, measured tones. They asked him to explain what had happened, giving him a chance to respond without raising the stakes unnecessarily. John watched closely as the situation unfolded. The woman, now safely in the patrol car, had been given her first real opportunity to rest, eat, and breathe without fear. But the work was not yet done. The farm owner, though defensive, would need to be held accountable for the conditions she had endured. John felt a mix of determination and relief. The immediate danger had passed, and the next step was ensuring justice and proper care. The officers led the man to the porch, speaking quietly but firmly about the seriousness of the situation. They explained that neglect of this kind could not be ignored and that an investigation would be necessary. John noticed the subtle shift in the man's demeanor. The initial defiance was giving way to a reluctant acknowledgement that the authorities were in charge now. John remained nearby, offering assistance if needed, but understanding that this was now the job of trained professionals. As the conversation continued, John reflected on what had brought him to this moment. He had set out that morning with the simple goal of buying a horse. He had expected an ordinary day, filled with routine and predictable tasks. Instead, he had walked into a situation that tested his courage, patience, and empathy. He realized how fragile life could be, how quickly the ordinary could shift into the extraordinary, and how even small decisions, stepping into the barn, speaking gently, offering a blanket, could have life-changing consequences. The officers carefully examined the barn, documenting the condition and taking note of the surroundings. John pointed out details: the corner where she had been sitting, the marks of neglect, and the general state of the building. They listened attentively, asking questions when necessary, and John answered as best as he could, recounting every detail he had observed. He wanted to ensure that no part of the situation was overlooked. During this time, the woman, wrapped in the blanket, had been reassured repeatedly by the officers. They spoke to her softly, confirming that she was safe and explaining what would happen next. Though her fear was still evident, there were signs of trust beginning to emerge. Her hands, which had trembled earlier, were now calmer as she listened to the officer's words. John felt a quiet satisfaction seeing her begin to respond to the presence of others without fear. The farm owner, realizing the seriousness of the situation, finally spoke, offering explanations that were half-hearted and evasive. The officers, trained to remain calm and professional, guided the conversation carefully, ensuring that every detail was addressed without confrontation escalating into conflict. John observed silently, knowing that his role was mostly complete. He had discovered the truth, helped the woman, and provided crucial information. Now, it was in the hands of those trained to handle such situations properly. Eventually, the officers took the man into custody for questioning. John watched as the legal process began to unfold, understanding that this was a necessary step to ensure the woman's safety and to prevent anyone else from facing similar harm. Though he was relieved that the immediate danger had passed, he also felt the lingering weight of what he had witnessed. It was a reminder that cruelty could exist quietly, hidden in plain sight, and that sometimes courage meant simply noticing the signs and taking action. After the farm owner was taken away, John stayed behind to help the officers ensure the property was secure. They asked him questions, documenting what he had seen, and John answered each one patiently. He wanted to make sure the woman's story was fully understood and that nothing would be overlooked in the investigation. It was important to him that she had every chance to heal and rebuild her life. As the day drew on, John finally returned to his truck. The sun was now high in the sky, casting bright light across the fields. The barn, which had seemed ominous just hours earlier, now felt like a place where change had begun. He drove slowly back to his ranch, reflecting on the morning's events. The experience had been exhausting, emotionally and physically, but it had also been profoundly important. He had witnessed both suffering and resilience, fear and courage, despair and hope. That evening, John sat quietly on the porch of his ranch, watching the horses graze in the fading light. He thought about the woman, about the way she had trusted him enough to take small steps toward safety, and about the courage it must take to rebuild a life after trauma. He felt a deep sense of humility, knowing that his actions, while small in the grand scheme, had made a real difference. He realized that sometimes the most meaningful moments in life are not the ones we plan or expect. They are the moments that challenge us, that push us to act with empathy and courage, and that remind us of the profound impact one person can have on another. John had started the day looking for a horse, but he ended it having witnessed the strength of the human spirit and the importance of standing up for what is right. In the quiet of the evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, John felt a sense of peace. He had done what he could, and now it was up to others to continue the work, to ensure that the woman received the care, protection, and support she deserved. But he also knew that he would carry the memory of that day with him forever. A day when courage, compassion, and quiet determination had intersected in a way that changed lives. Once the authorities had taken control of the situation, John watched as the woman was gently guided toward a patrol car. She moved slowly, her body tense and uncertain, wrapped in the blanket that John had given her. Every step she took seemed cautious, as though she was still testing the world to see if it was safe. John could see the exhaustion etched into her face, the kind that comes from long periods of fear, uncertainty, and isolation. Yet, despite everything she had endured, there was a spark, a small flicker of hope, that began to show in her eyes as she realized she was no longer alone. The officers spoke softly, explaining to her that she was safe and that she would soon be taken to a place where she could rest, eat, and receive medical attention. They emphasized that she had nothing to fear and that no one would harm her. John stayed nearby, offering quiet reassurance. "You're safe now," he said again, his voice calm and gentle. "No one will hurt you. You can rest." She gave a faint nod, her eyes still wary but beginning to accept that this moment was real, that someone was truly looking out for her. As they helped her into the car, John noticed her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the blanket. He kept his distance, allowing her space, but remained close enough that she could sense his presence. Sometimes, simply being near someone who is calm and trustworthy can be more comforting than words. John had learned this over years of working with animals and people alike. Trust is built slowly, through patience, consistency, and gentle care. Once she was seated safely in the patrol car, the officers buckled her in and spoke quietly about the journey ahead. They explained that she would be taken to a local medical center for an initial checkup, where she could receive food, water, and medical attention. After that, she would be brought to a safe shelter, where trained professionals could help her begin to heal emotionally and physically. John watched as the car drove away, feeling a mix of relief and reflection. The immediate danger had passed, but the journey of recovery was just beginning. He turned back to the barn, his mind still processing the morning's events. The place that had seemed so ordinary before had revealed hidden suffering, a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving. The corner where she had been sitting, the dim light, the scattered hay, it all told a story of hardship, neglect, and survival. John realized that while the rescue had been a critical first step, the woman's healing would take time, patience, and support. It was not something that could be rushed or forced. It would grow slowly, like a plant nurtured back to life after being left in the dark for too long. After the authorities finished documenting the scene and securing the property, John walked back toward his truck. The sun was high in the sky now, warm on his back, and the landscape seemed peaceful again. Yet the memory of what he had witnessed lingered, vivid and unshakable. He thought about the strength it must have taken for the woman to endure such circumstances, to survive in a situation that no one should ever have to face. Her resilience, though hidden beneath layers of fear and trauma, was remarkable. Driving back to his ranch, John reflected on how quickly life could change. That morning, he had set out to buy a horse, a simple, routine task. By noon, he had discovered someone in desperate need of help and had taken immediate action to ensure her safety. The contrast between his ordinary expectations and the extraordinary events of the day left him thoughtful. He realized that courage does not always require grand gestures. Sometimes, it is simply noticing the small signs of need, choosing to act, and remaining steady in moments of uncertainty. Once he reached his ranch, John went about his evening chores, feeding the horses, checking the fences, and making sure the cattle were settled. Everything seemed familiar, yet his mind kept drifting back to the woman and her journey towards safety. He thought about the officers who had handled the situation so carefully, about the shelter where she would be staying, and about the trained professionals who would help her begin to heal. John felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his actions had contributed to a larger effort, that, in some small way, he had helped change the course of her life. That night, John could not sleep easily. He kept replaying the moments in the barn, her eyes meeting his for the first time, her hesitant nods, and the way she had allowed herself to accept his help. It was a reminder of how fragile trust can be and how important it is to approach others with patience and understanding. He thought about the future for her, the challenges she would face, the trust she would need to rebuild, and the strength she would discover within herself. John felt both humbled and inspired by her resilience. In the days that followed, John continued his routine on the ranch, but the events of that morning remained with him. He often found himself looking at the horizon, reflecting on how a single decision to step into a barn had led to a cascade of life-changing events. He shared the story with a few close friends, not to boast, but to emphasize the importance of awareness, courage, and compassion. He wanted others to understand that sometimes, helping someone in need requires nothing more than noticing the signs, acting with care, and staying patient. Meanwhile, the woman's life was slowly beginning to improve. The shelter she had been taken to provided her with food, clean clothes, and a safe environment. Medical professionals checked her health, ensuring that she received any necessary care. Counselors and social workers began the process of emotional support, helping her navigate the feelings of fear, confusion, and uncertainty that had accumulated over time. The world outside the barn, once frightening and unknown, was starting to feel safer with each passing day. John occasionally received updates through the authorities, learning that she was adjusting to her new environment, slowly regaining confidence, and beginning to trust others again. Each small improvement brought a sense of relief and satisfaction. He realized that the process of healing, though gradual, was possible when people were given care, support, and kindness. It reinforced his belief in the power of human connection and the importance of stepping up when someone is in need. Reflecting on the events, John understood that rescue is only the first step. True recovery requires continued attention, patience, and nurturing. He recognized that his role, though brief, had been vital in that initial moment. The moment when someone could have turned away but chose to act instead. That decision had set in motion a chain of events that would allow a life to be saved, dignity to be restored, and hope to flourish. As the weeks passed, John returned to his ranch work with renewed perspective. Each day, as he cared for his horses and tended to the fields, he carried with him the memory of the woman in the barn and the fragile trust she had placed in him. The experience had changed him, making him more aware of the unseen struggles around him, more sensitive to the signs of someone in need, and more determined to act with compassion whenever possible. One evening, after finishing his chores, John sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He thought about the woman's journey, the dark barn, the fearful moments, the first tentative steps towards safety, and the ongoing process of healing. He felt a quiet pride, not in his own actions, but in the fact that courage, patience, and care had made a real difference. It was a reminder that the simplest gestures, offering a blanket, speaking gently, staying calm, could be profoundly meaningful. John knew that life on the ranch would continue as it always had, with routines, chores, and predictable patterns. But he also knew that the memory of that day, the woman's story, and the moments of courage and compassion would stay with him forever. They had become part of his understanding of the world, a reminder that even in ordinary places, extraordinary acts of humanity can unfold. By the time night fully settled over the ranch, John felt a sense of calm and hope. The immediate danger had passed, the woman was in safe hands, and the process of healing had begun. He understood that the world could be harsh, that suffering existed even in places that seemed peaceful, but he also knew that kindness, courage, and human connection had the power to transform lives. The barn, once a place of fear and darkness, had become a symbol of a new beginning, a reminder that even in the most unlikely places, hope could take root. As he finally went inside to rest, John carried with him a profound sense of gratitude for his own ability to act, for the resilience of the human spirit, and for the small but powerful ways that one person's courage can create a ripple effect, changing the course of another's life forever. The memory of the woman, her trust, and the first moments of her rescue would remain with him always, a quiet testament to the impact of empathy and the importance of stepping in when someone needs help. The weeks following the rescue were a time of quiet transformation, both for the woman and for John. For her, each day brought small steps toward a new life, a life that had once seemed impossible. At the shelter, she was given food, a warm bed, and clean clothes, simple comforts that many people take for granted but which carried immense significance for someone who had endured long-term fear and neglect. She learned to trust the shelter staff slowly, one gentle interaction at a time, their patient and consistent care creating a foundation that allowed her to begin believing in her own safety. John, meanwhile, continued his routine on the ranch, but his perspective had shifted. The encounter in the barn had left an indelible mark on him. Each day, as he walked among the horses and tended to the fields, he thought about her courage, the courage it had taken to survive in darkness, and the courage it would take to step into the light of a new life. He reflected on how fragile life could be and how important it was to act when someone showed signs of needing help. The memory of her eyes, filled with fear and then with tentative trust, stayed with him, shaping how he approached people and situations in his own life. At the shelter, the woman was encouraged to speak about her experiences at her own pace. Some days, the memories were overwhelming, and she would retreat into silence. Other days, she would find the strength to share small fragments of her story, revealing a resilience that had carried her through years of uncertainty. Counselors and support workers guided her gently, helping her understand that the fear she carried was not her fault and that she deserved safety, comfort, and respect. Slowly, she began to learn that it was possible to trust again. John received updates from the authorities, who informed him of her progress. Each report brought him relief and hope. He learned that she was adjusting to her new environment, eating well, sleeping safely, and beginning to engage with others in the shelter. He could sense the changes even from afar, a lighter tone in her voice, a small smile appearing when she felt safe, and the beginnings of self-confidence returning after so long without support. John felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his actions had played a part in starting this chain of healing, even if the full journey was still ahead. One afternoon, John decided to visit the shelter. He wanted to check on her personally, to see how she was doing and to offer reassurance that someone from outside cared about her progress. When he arrived, the staff welcomed him warmly, explaining that she was in a common area, reading quietly. As he approached, she looked up, her eyes wide but not with fear this time. There was a flicker of recognition, of connection, and she hesitated before offering a small, tentative smile. John returned it gently, giving her space to adjust to his presence. "I wanted to see how you're doing," John said softly. "You're safe and everyone here is taking care of you." She nodded, her hands folded in her lap, still cautious but curious. It was a simple exchange, yet it held immense meaning. For her, it was a sign that people outside the shelter cared, that the world could be gentle, and that her story mattered. For John, it was a confirmation that the steps he had taken that morning, noticing her, speaking gently, offering a blanket and calling for help, had not been in vain. Over the following weeks, the woman began to participate in structured activities at the shelter, simple routines that helped her regain confidence, such as cooking small meals, walking in the garden, and engaging in creative expression through art and writing. Each small achievement built upon the last, slowly reconstructing a sense of self and stability that had been eroded by years of fear. The staff encouraged her to make choices, to assert herself in ways she had not been able to before, and to begin planning for her future. John continued to visit occasionally, each visit reinforcing her trust and reminding her that people could be dependable and kind. They spoke about neutral subjects at first: the weather, the animals he cared for at the ranch, and the beauty of the countryside. These conversations, simple and ordinary, were crucial in helping her reconnect with the world outside the barn, reminding her that life could hold peaceful and joyful moments. Gradually, she shared more of her thoughts, dreams, and hopes, opening up in ways she had not imagined possible. Meanwhile, John reflected on the broader lessons from the experience. He realized that courage is not always about dramatic heroics. Often, it is quiet, patient, and steady. Noticing someone in need, offering help, and staying calm during moments of uncertainty can create profound impact. He also understood the importance of empathy, of listening without judgment, and of acting with careful thought to protect and support those who are vulnerable. The experience reshaped his perspective, reinforcing the value of vigilance, kindness, and courage in everyday life. Months passed, and the woman's progress continued steadily. She began participating in educational programs, developing skills that would allow her to regain independence. She learned to communicate her needs and assert her boundaries, skills that were essential for rebuilding her confidence and sense of agency. John observed her growth with pride from afar, knowing that the foundation he had helped lay that morning in the barn had played a vital role in enabling her to take these steps. Eventually, the woman was able to move into transitional housing, a space where she could live more independently while continuing to receive support. The move marked a major milestone in her journey, a tangible sign that she was reclaiming control over her life. John visited once more before she fully settled in, bringing small gifts from the ranch, fresh eggs, a basket of fruits, and a simple hand-painted card from the staff thanking her for her bravery and resilience. She accepted the gifts with gratitude, her smile more confident, her posture stronger. During this visit, John and the woman shared a quiet conversation about the future. "You're doing amazing," John said. "Remember, this is your life now. You have the right to be safe, happy, and to make your own choices. You can take things one step at a time." She nodded, a sense of determination and hope visible in her eyes. She spoke softly, expressing her gratitude for the support and care she had received, acknowledging the role John had played in helping her find safety that day. As John drove back to his ranch that evening, he reflected on the long journey they had both experienced, from the first tense moments in the dark barn to the cautious steps toward independence and safety. He felt a deep sense of humility and gratitude, understanding that sometimes the most meaningful moments in life are quiet and simple, yet carry immense weight. His actions, grounded in awareness and compassion, had set in motion a series of events that allowed a life to be saved and rebuilt. Back at the ranch, life continued as it always had, but John was forever changed by the experience. He cared for his horses, tended to his fields, and followed the rhythms of ranch life. Yet he carried with him the lessons he had learned about courage, empathy, and the power of human connection. He thought often of the woman, her resilience, and her gradual return to hope and independence. He understood that even the smallest gestures of care could create ripples of change in the lives of others. Over time, John shared his story with friends and community members, not to glorify himself, but to emphasize the importance of noticing the needs of those around them and acting with compassion. His story became a quiet reminder that ordinary people, through simple acts of courage and kindness, can make extraordinary differences. The woman's journey from fear and isolation to safety and empowerment was a testament to human resilience, the capacity for healing, and the impact one person can have on another's life. Years later, John would still think about that morning in the barn, the moment he had discovered someone in need, and the ripple effect that followed. The woman, now living independently, continuing her education, and building a safe, fulfilling life, remained a symbol of hope. John understood that life is unpredictable, that courage can appear in ordinary moments, and that the combination of awareness, empathy, and action can transform lives in ways that are profound and lasting. In the quiet evenings on his ranch, as the sun set and the horses grazed peacefully, John felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had not only cared for his animals and his land, but he had also played a role in helping someone reclaim her life. The experience reminded him that life is a tapestry of small, meaningful actions, and that even in ordinary places, extraordinary courage and kindness can emerge. The barn, the dark corner, and the frightened woman had become part of his story, a story of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of human connection. As he watched the sky darken and stars appear above the wide, open fields, John felt peace. The world was not perfect, but in that imperfect world, moments of care and courage could create lasting change. He had witnessed it, been part of it, and learned that even ordinary people, through simple and thoughtful actions, could make a profound difference in the lives of others. That understanding, quiet yet powerful, would stay with him forever.